Well, good afternoon. My name is Robert Johnson, and I'm here today to present to you for about 10 minutes on the business internship class that I did for my degree at Southeastern University. I chose to do my business internship at a place called the Association of Related Churches. Just to give you a short little window into what ARC, or the Association of Related Churches, is all about. I just wanted to give you the vision statement, which says ARC, or we at ARC, exist to see a thriving church in every community reaching people with the message of Jesus. I came from an ARC church years ago. That's where God turned my life around. I moved to Alabama to go to college at Church of the Highlands, which was ARC plant number 1 about 20 years ago. Since that time, ARC has planted now almost 1,000 churches here in the U.S. and even beyond. And so when I got the opportunity to intern with ARC, especially in the area of diversity, that was something that I had to take a stab at. I myself, being biracial, the topic of diversity is something that I've been passionate about my whole life, and specifically with this passion for the local church that I found. I love discussing what that looks like inside of the context of the local church. And so being on this team has been a great joy for the last couple of months. I feel like I've learned a lot. I feel like the team has grown together a lot. And so here in this presentation, I just want to take a few minutes and show you some of the things that we've gone over. Let's get into my goals quickly. And so if you see here, I've listed out my goals. Number one, mainly in short, was to increase my knowledge of the subject. This is something I'm passionate about, as I mentioned, and I study it quite often on my own. But I did find 2 books that I'll tell you a little more about here in a second that I chose to read during this internship that have really expanded my knowledge. Number 2, I wanted to demonstrate what I've learned in some of the meetings that we have as a team, leading those meetings specifically, so that we can come up with actual practical objectives. Sometimes I think in these conversations we get caught up in just acknowledging the issues, which I would say is the first step, but actually coming up with practical steps for churches and organizations to implement was really my goal there. And then number 3 was just, for me, from an organization standpoint, I wanted to increase my knowledge of the HR department and the role it plays in having healthy race relations in a organization or church. So with that, we can talk about the first book, which is The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. This book really, I would summarize it as an extremely brutal and honest look in the mirror for the capital C church throughout its history here in the United States, and what he calls its compromise or complicity in the issues of race. The church has done great things to advance the cause of equality, and this book doesn't take away from that, but it also does shed light on what he would harp on, which is this complicit and neutral attitude that the church has also taken in every major season of American history towards the issue of racial injustice, starting with slavery and working its way all the way up to modern day. Sometimes a difficult book to read, but if you're into history, this is a great one to get you started on understanding the church's long history with this subject. And I really feel like, if I had a takeaway from this book, number 1, it would be that there needs to be acknowledgement of these issues. It's not an agenda. It's not Marxism or whatever it is that people try and spin to argue against this truth. It is actually just an honest look in the mirror, and we have to acknowledge the church's history with this difficult topic. Number 2 is discovery. I think this book takes you on a journey of discovery, of learning more, and I think in every conversation you have on race, I think that has to be the disposition of your heart, is to learn and value other people's experiences, so that you don't invalidate actually who they are and the things that they've walked through. And then lastly is engagement, and I think this is where this book could improve. I think there's some good practical things that he talks about, but he doesn't actually give churches a playbook, so to speak, to run with. So secondly, I read a book called Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. This book really is more, I think, emotional in a sense. It's getting towards the root of bitterness unforgiveness. It's helping people to extend hands and shake hands across the table in a sense, and giving them the practical tools to have conversations. I would describe this book as both educational and really a playbook, as I said, to facilitate honest, open discussion about the difficult issue of race, both inside and outside of the local church. So if you're interested in learning more about Latasha's perspective on that, this would be a great book to read. I think, as I said, if I had a takeaway, it's that God's heart is that there would be unity and racial unity specifically here on earth, not just in heaven, right? That's what Jesus told us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we should fight for that and believe for that and stand in the gap for racial reconciliation. And I think, it also really drives home the message that caring about one another is more important than any paradigm that we have or political leaning that we have. At the end of the day, we're all God's children, made in His image, and so we should learn to live in that family of God, the kingdom of God together. I had some group meetings, as I mentioned. I'll talk about those for just a couple of minutes. Those were very dynamic and fun meetings to have. We all took time to read both of these books together. And really the main goals for these meetings, number one is that we would learn together as a group. Number two is that we would find practical ideas for churches to implement when it comes to racial justice and the fight for that, the church's role in that. And then number three, finding practical ideas for ARC as an organization to implement as well. I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation. I don't think that you find a list of the top 10 solutions and then stop there. Whether it be for churches or organizations. I think you actually, from a systemic standpoint, need to put people of diverse backgrounds in positions of authority and leadership so that this can be an ongoing, lifelong journey towards unity. These takeaways is kind of what I just mentioned, but I would say that ARC and ARC churches can demonstrate their commitment to the cause of equality by giving money to ministries. That would be one way, ministries that focus on racial reconciliation. And then, as I mentioned before, I think you also need to have diverse leadership, right? There's a difference, another way to say it is, there's a difference between equality and equity. Equality is everybody's equal in the eyes of God. Equity is everybody has the same opportunities to step up and take authority within an organization or a church. And I think that's where the American church needs to continue to trend. Lastly, I would just like to talk for a brief moment about my research with HR and the role that it plays. I would just pause for a second and say what I've discovered is that there is a big difference between stewarding a movement, which I would say ARC is a movement of churches with the goal of church planting. As I mentioned, over 1,000 churches now that are in the network, some that we've planted, some that choose to partner with us financially. And so there's movement stewardship, which has its own set of challenges for racial equality and the fight for justice. And then there's also the internal organizational structure that needs to take place right here at the ARC office, but also within every organization and church. And that's the big role I think that HR plays. In summary, I would just like to say that HR, for me, what I think the biggest role it plays is to facilitate, a safe environment for people of all different backgrounds and walks of life to share the concerns that they may have or the discrimination that they perceive they've experienced on the job site. This person should be, overly qualified in their ability to mediate conversations around these difficult topics. And there should be clear, streamlined processes for people of all diverse backgrounds to be able to bring those things forward safely and sometimes even anonymously if that needs to happen. I think, no organization can stumble upon racial unity and diversity by accident. And if you do, you're not going to have it very long because everybody knows there's tension around this topic. So I would say let's just go ahead and be intentional, right, with our organizations and with the HR department, with the policies and procedures that we put in place to ensure that there is honest, open, and transparent communication and safety for all people. So here at ARC, I feel like I've learned a lot about this topic. I'm going to continue dedicating myself to learning on this topic, and I hope that this short presentation actually inspired you and maybe challenged you. Thank you so much.